The Last Stop Diner sits on a forgotten stretch of Route 16, just outside Millfield, Ohio. It's one of those places time seems to have abandoned. A chrome and neon relic from the 1950s, with a flickering sign that buzzes in the perpetual fog that hangs over this particular bend in the road. Most GPS systems don't even register it exists. Travelers who find it do so by accident, usually when they're desperately low on gas or coffee around 3 a.m. I didn't plan to work there. Nobody does. But when your car breaks down in a town where the only mechanic quotes you a repair bill that exceeds your bank balance, and the only motel that'll take your maxed out credit card is directly across from a diner with a "Help Wanted" sign, it starts to feel like fate. The interview with Mabel Reed, the owner, lasted exactly 2 minutes. She was a rail-thin woman in her 70s with perfectly coiffed silver hair that never seemed to move and cat-eye glasses with rhinestones in the corners. Her questions were simple. Could I work nights? Did I have any problem with unusual clientele? Would I be willing to follow very specific protocols? I said yes to everything. When you've got $43.27 to your name and your 2006 Honda Civic needs a new transmission, you don't ask questions. You'll start tonight, Mabel said, sliding a laminated card across the Formica counter. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Memorize these rules before your shift. No exceptions, no deviations. I glanced at the card. Employee protocols, Last Stop Diner. Always greet customers with, "Welcome to Last Stop. What can I get you tonight?" Never say, "Good evening," "Good morning," or mention the time. Do not ask for names. If customers offer them, do not write them down or repeat them. Some customers will only come in when it's raining. Serve them first, regardless of who arrived before them. Never serve food or coffee that has gone cold. If a customer hasn't touched their order for more than 5 minutes, replace it immediately. The jukebox plays on its own. Do not unplug it. Attempt to change the music or mention the songs to customers. If a customer asks what year it is, reply only with, "Does it matter?" and move on to take their order. Booth 13 must remain empty except on the last day of each month. On these days, place a single black coffee and slice of cherry pie at this booth at exactly 3:33 a.m. Do not watch who or what comes to claim it. If you hear whispers from the restrooms when they are empty, knock 3 times and walk away. Do not enter until the whispers stop. Should you drop silverware, leave it where it falls for exactly 7 minutes before picking it up. Some customers will appear blurry or out of focus. Serve them normally, but do not stare. If a child enters alone, seat them at the counter, never at a booth. Give them a hot chocolate with exactly 7 marshmallows, even if they order something else. The wall phone may ring. Do not answer it unless it rings exactly 3 times. If it rings more or fewer times, ignore it. Salt must be present on all tables at all times. If a shaker is empty, refill it immediately. If a customer asks, "Is this the last stop?" reply with, "For tonight, yes." Never say, "For now," or "forever." Never, under any circumstances, follow a customer out to the parking lot, no matter what they've forgotten or how much they insist. At the bottom of the card, in smaller text, breaking any of these rules may result in termination of employment and other consequences beyond management's control. These seem oddly specific, I said, trying to sound casual. Mabel's perfectly lipsticked mouth twitched in what might have been a smile or a grimace. Every good business has its systems, Riley. Our customers appreciate consistency. She slid a neatly folded black uniform across the counter. The diner gets a particular crowd at night. Follow the rules, and you'll do just fine. I wanted to ask more questions. Why the obsession with the number 7? Why the rule about the rain? What exactly other consequences meant? But something in Mabel's steady gaze suggested questions weren't welcome. Besides, I'd worked food service before. Every restaurant has its quirks, its superstitions, its systems that don't make sense to outsiders. You'll be working with Eddie, she continued. He handles the grill. Doesn't talk much, but he's reliable. Been with me for, well, quite some time. As she spoke, a broad-shouldered man emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. Eddie looked to be in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair cut military short, and a face lined with the kind of creases that come from decades of squinting at a hot grill. His eyes met mine briefly, then slid away. "Riley's starting tonight," Mabel told him. "Show her the ropes." Eddie nodded once, his expression unreadable, then disappeared back into the kitchen without a word. "He takes some getting used to," Mabel said with a small shrug. "The night shift is quiet anyway, mostly truckers and insomniacs. You probably won't serve more than a dozen customers in a shift." I folded the uniform over my arm, tucking the rule card into my pocket. "Anything else I should know?" For just a moment, something like concern flickered across Mabel's perfectly composed face. "The diner serves a purpose in this town, Riley. More important than just coffee and pie. Remember that when things seem strange." Before I could ask what she meant, the bell above the door jingled, and Mabel's attention shifted to an elderly couple shuffling in for the early bird special. Our conversation was clearly over. That evening, I returned to the diner at 9:45 p.m., dressed in the black uniform with the red-trimmed apron. The rule card read and reread until I could recite it from memory. The place looked different at night. The neon signs buzzed more urgently, casting pools of blue and red across the empty parking lot. The fog was thicker, obscuring everything beyond the diner's immediate surroundings, as if the building existed in its own pocket of reality. Eddie was already at the grill, preparing for the night shift. He nodded at my arrival, but remained silent as I tied my apron and familiarized myself with the ancient register. The diner was empty except for a single customer, a gaunt man in a trucker's cap hunched over a mug of coffee at the counter. He didn't look up as I moved around, preparing napkin dispensers and checking condiments. At exactly 10 p.m., Eddie rang the small bell on the kitchen pass-through. "You're on, new girl," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Don't forget the rules." I approached the trucker, notepad in hand. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" He looked up then, and it took everything in me not to visibly react. His face was wrong somehow. Features slightly misaligned, eyes set just a fraction too far apart. Skin with an undertone that wasn't quite natural. When he smiled, I caught a glimpse of too many teeth. "Just the check," he said, his voice oddly muffled as if coming from underwater. "Need to get back on the road before dawn." As I rang him up, I noticed his hands, the fingers too long, nails yellowed and thick. He paid with crumpled bills that felt damp and smelled faintly of earth. When I handed him his change, our fingers brushed, and his skin was ice cold. He left without another word, the bell above the door tinkling in his wake. Through the window, I watched him cross the parking lot to where a semi-truck was parked in the shadows. For just a moment, the truck's outline seemed to waver and shift into something else entirely, something that never belonged on any highway. Then the fog swallowed both truck and driver. "First rule of the last stop," Eddie said from behind me, making me jump. "Don't watch them leave." "That wasn't on the list," I said, trying to steady my breathing. Eddie's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "There are the official rules," he said, wiping down the counter where the trucker had sat. "And then there are the rules you learn yourself, night by night." The bell above the door jingled again. I turned to greet our next customer, trying to ignore the fact that I hadn't seen any headlights pull into the parking lot, nor heard the rumble of an engine over the diner's ambient noise. "Welcome to Last Stop," I said, the greeting already feeling strange on my tongue. "What can I get you tonight?" Outside, it began to rain, droplets hitting the windows in patterns that sounded almost like whispered conversations. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life, though no one had touched it, playing a Patsy Cline song I'd heard 1,000 times, but never quite like this. Slowed down, the singer's voice stretched and distorted until it barely sounded human. I was beginning to understand that the Last Stop diner served a very particular clientele, and that I'd be wise to follow the rules exactly as written. My first full night at the Last Stop was quiet until about 1:17 a.m. I remember checking the regulator clock above the pass-through window when I heard the first heavy drops hit the roof. Within minutes, the drizzle transformed into a downpour that drummed against the diner's metal roof and streaked the windows with rivulets that distorted the neon light. "Get ready," Eddie called from the kitchen. "Rain brings them in." I was restocking sugar packets when the bell above the door chimed. A woman entered, though I hadn't seen any car pull up. She was completely dry despite the torrential downpour. Not a drop on her beige trench coat or carefully styled 1940s victory rolls. Her makeup was impeccable, red lipstick precisely applied, though something about its shade seemed off under the fluorescent lights. "Welcome to Last Stop," I recited. "What can I get you tonight?" She slid into a booth by the window, movements fluid yet somehow too precise. Coffee black and a moment of someone's time. Her voice had a strange quality to it, like radio static underscoring each word. I remembered Rule 3. Some customers will only come in when it's raining. Serve them first, regardless of who arrived before them. Though she was currently our only customer, I hurried to pour her coffee. When I returned with the steaming mug, she was staring out the window, one perfectly manicured finger tracing patterns in the condensation that shouldn't have formed in the summer heat. The patterns looked like symbols I'd never seen before. Angular things that hurt my eyes if I focused on them too long. "Your coffee, ma'am," I said, placing it before her. She didn't look at me, just kept staring out the window and drawing those strange symbols. "Do you know what happens when someone dies in the rain, Riley?" I stiffened. I hadn't told her my name, and my uniform had no name tag. "I don't, ma'am." "They get caught between," she said, finally turning to me. Her eyes were wrong, pupils too large, irises a shade of blue that seemed to shift and swirl like water. Not up, not down, just between. Especially when the death isn't quite natural. She smiled, revealing teeth that were just slightly too white, too perfect. "The rain is a door, or maybe a window. Depends on which side you're looking from." I nodded politely, unsure how to respond and increasingly certain I was serving a dead woman. "Can I get you anything else?" "Just the coffee," she said, lifting the mug to her lips but not drinking. "I never got to finish my last cup, you know. June 18th, 1952. The brakes failed on Mountain View Road." She set the mug down untouched. It was raining, just like tonight. The bell chimed again, and 3 more customers entered. A family dressed in outdated hiking gear, their clothes tattered and stained with something dark that might have been mud. Like the woman, they were completely dry despite the storm. The father's neck bent at an angle that made my stomach turn, while the mother's eyes were fixed and glassy. Only the little boy, about 7 years old, looked relatively normal, though his skin had an unnatural pallor. "Welcome to Last Stop," I said, my voice only slightly unsteady. "What can I get you tonight?" "Hot chocolate for my son," the father said, his voice echoing as if coming from deep inside a cave. "Coffee for us, and 3 slices of apple pie." I noticed the boy was staring at me with unusual intensity. "Are you alive?" he asked suddenly, his voice clearer and more natural than his parents'. "Tommy," his mother scolded, her head turning toward him with mechanical precision, while her eyes remained fixed forward. Manners. "It's okay to be curious," the father said, reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair with fingers that bent in too many places. "But yes, son, she's one of the living ones. That's why the diner hired her." I pretended not to hear as I hurried back to place their order with Eddie, who was already plating slices of pie as if he'd anticipated exactly what they'd want. "The boy," I whispered. "Rule 11 says children alone get hot chocolate with 7 marshmallows at the counter, but he's with his parents." "He counts as alone," Eddie replied cryptically, sliding the plates toward me. "Trust me on that. Give him the marshmallows." When I returned with their order, I noticed the woman in the booth had vanished, leaving behind her untouched coffee and a small puddle of water on the seat where she'd been sitting. I quickly cleared the booth, replacing the salt shaker that had somehow emptied completely during her brief stay. I served the family, making sure to give the boy exactly 7 mini marshmallows in his hot chocolate despite his parents' presence. He counted them carefully before smiling up at me, a normal child's smile that made my heart ache in a way I couldn't quite explain. "We go camping every year," he told me as his parents silently sipped their coffee. "This year, we went to Hocking Hills. Do you know it?" I nodded. Hocking Hills State Park was about 40 miles from Millfield. The waterfalls are beautiful. "Mom wanted to see Old Man's Cave," the boy continued, stirring his marshmallows until they dissolved. "Dad said the trail was too steep after the rain, but she insisted." His voice took on a sing-song quality. Down we went, slip-sliding away. 1, 2, 3, all the way to the bottom. Crack went Dad, splash went Mom, and thump went me. My blood ran cold as I realized what he was describing. I'd seen the news story 3 weeks earlier. A family of 3 had died in a tragic accident at Old Man's Cave when a rain-slicked trail had given way beneath them. "I'm sorry," I whispered, unsure what else to say. The boy shrugged. "It didn't hurt much, but we have to wait for someone now. That's why we come here when it rains." He looked at his parents, who stared vacantly ahead as they mechanically ate their pie. I think they got more broken inside than me. They don't talk the same anymore. A sharp bell from the kitchen saved me from having to respond. Eddie was watching me, his expression warning me away from further conversation. I nodded slightly and moved back behind the counter, busying myself with wiping down already clean surfaces. Over the next 2 hours, the rain continued to drum against the roof, and more customers trickled in, all arriving impossibly dry, all slightly wrong in ways that were difficult to pinpoint. An elderly man whose feet didn't quite touch the floor. A teenage girl with fingernails that grew visibly as she ate her French fries. A businessman whose reflection in the window showed an empty suit. I followed the rules precisely, never commenting on their oddities, replacing cooling coffee, ensuring salt was always present. The jukebox played a haunting melody I almost recognized, something by Roy Orbison slowed down until his distinctive voice became an otherworldly moan. At exactly 3:33 a.m., I remembered it was July 31st, the last day of the month. Rule 7. Booth 13 must remain empty except on the last day of each month. On these days, place a single black coffee and slice of cherry pie at this booth at exactly 3:33 a.m. I quickly prepared the required items, setting them carefully at the booth tucked in the farthest corner of the diner. As instructed, I turned away immediately, not watching to see who or what might claim them. But in the reflection of the chrome napkin holder, I caught a glimpse of something tall and thin sliding into the booth. Something with too many joints and a face that seemed to be nothing but shadows beneath a wide-brimmed hat. I quickly averted my eyes, focusing instead on refilling salt shakers with shaking hands. The wall phone rang suddenly. Once, Twice, 3 times, then silence. Rule 12 indicated I should answer it after exactly 3 rings. I approached cautiously, lifting the receiver to my ear. "Last stop diner," I said quietly. Silence on the line, then a sound like water rushing through pipes. A voice emerged from the static, distant yet somehow intimate, as if speaking directly into my mind rather than my ear. "Is this where they wait?" the voice asked, neither male nor female, neither young nor old. I hesitated, unsure how to respond since this wasn't covered in the rules. "The waiting is almost over," the voice continued, not waiting for my answer. "The veil thins. Tell them their ride arrives with the blue moon." The line went dead. I hung up slowly, processing what I'd heard. August would have a blue moon, a second full moon in the same month. It was a rare occurrence that some cultures associated with supernatural events. When I turned back to the diner, all the customers were staring at me. The family, the businessman, the elderly man, the teenage girl. Even the little boy's formerly animated face had gone blank. As one, they turned away and resumed eating as if nothing had happened, except for booth 13's occupant. It remained focused on me, that featureless shadow face giving the impression of a smile without actually changing. A long, 2-jointed finger tapped against the table in a deliberate rhythm that matched my heartbeat exactly. Eddie appeared silently at my side, startling me. "Don't look at that one," he murmured, barely moving his lips. "That's the collector. It doesn't come for coffee and pie." "What does it collect?" I whispered back. Eddie's weathered face was grave. "Overdue passengers. And sometimes employees who don't follow the rules." As the night progressed, the rain gradually subsided, and our unusual customers began to leave one by one. The family departed last, the little boy turning to wave at me with a too pale hand. "See you next time it rains," he called, his voice echoing slightly. "Maybe you can sit with us when your time comes." His mother placed a stiff hand on his shoulder, guiding him through the door. Through the window, I watched them disappear into the fog rather than walking to a car. There one moment, gone the next. When the diner was empty, except for the lingering presence in booth 13, Eddie joined me at the counter, drying his hands on a dish towel. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "First rain shift is always the hardest." "Those people," I began. "Aren't people anymore," he finished for me. "At least, not in the way you're thinking." "They're dead," I said flatly, needing to hear it confirmed. Eddie considered this, choosing his words carefully. "They're in transit. Not everywhere has a direct route to wherever they're going. Some need a way station, a last stop." I thought about the phone call, the message about the blue moon, and where... What? Some kind of supernatural bus terminal? Something like that. Eddie nodded toward booth 13, where the pie and coffee sat untouched, though the seat was now empty. "Some are passengers, some are ticket collectors, and some..." He trailed off, his gaze distant. "Some are stuck here like that boy, waiting for someone to come fetch them home." I thought about the woman in the trench coat, her perfectly styled victory rolls. "June 18th, 1952, I murmured. "A car accident in the rain." Eddie's expression softened. "Margaret. She's been coming here every rainstorm for almost 70 years. Her husband promised he'd find her, but he never did." He sighed heavily. "Time works differently for them. Some have been waiting a week, some decades." "And the blue moon?" I asked. "The phone call said their ride comes with the blue moon." A shadow passed over Eddie's face. "That happens once every few years. A mass departure. The barriers between here and elsewhere." get thin enough for even the most lost souls to find their way onward. He began wiping down the counter with methodical precision. It gets busy that night, real busy, and sometimes the wrong things slip through while the door is open. The implications sent a chill down my spine. What does that mean for us, the living staff? Eddie's smile didn't reach his eyes. It means we follow the rules, Riley. We follow them exactly, especially on the night of the blue moon. As dawn approached, I helped Eddie clean and prepare for the day shift. The diner gradually transformed back into a normal-looking establishment, the neon lights less intense, the shadows less deep. By the time Mabel arrived at 5:45 a.m., it was just another roadside diner waiting for the breakfast crowd. "How was your first night?" she asked, hanging her purse in her small office. "Educational," I replied carefully. "I met some interesting customers." Mabel's expression remained neutral, but her eyes held a question. "And the rules? Did you follow them all?" "To the letter," I assured her. "Though I'm starting to think there might be more I should know." "All in good time," she said, patting my hand with her cool, dry fingers. "You've passed your first test. Rain shifts are always the most challenging." She reached into her purse and handed me an envelope with my night's pay in cash, considerably more than minimum wage. "Same time tonight?" I thought about declining, about walking away from the last stop diner and its ghostly clientele. But then I remembered my broken-down Honda at Miller's Auto Repair, my dwindling bank account, and the strange little boy who'd seemed so normal compared to his broken parents. "I'll be here," I said finally. "But I have questions." Mabel nodded as if she'd expected this. Everyone does, after their first rain shift. "Come early tonight, and I'll explain what I can." She glanced toward booth 13, where the untouched pie and coffee still sat. "Some things about the last stop are on a need-to-know basis. And now, Riley, you need to know." As I walked back to my motel room in the brightening morning light, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stepped into something far larger and more complex than a simple job at a roadside diner. The rules on that laminated card weren't just quirky business practices. They were protective measures, boundaries between the living and the dead. And in 2 weeks, when the blue moon rose over Millfield, those boundaries would thin to the point of breaking. I had until then to learn whatever other rules existed, the ones not written down, the ones Eddie had hinted at learning night by night. Because something told me that when the blue moon shone on the last stop diner, simply serving coffee to the dead would be the least of my concerns. I arrived at the diner an hour before my shift the next night, just as Mabel had suggested. The evening crowd was thinning out. A few truckers finishing late dinners, a couple of local teenagers sharing a milkshake, normal living customers enjoying normal food. Mabel was at the register, tallying the day's receipts with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been doing the same task for decades. She glanced up when the bell announced my arrival, giving me a small nod. "Come to the back," she said, gesturing toward her office. "Betty can handle the floor for a few more minutes." I followed her through the swinging kitchen doors, past a day cook who was nothing like the silent, intense Eddie, and into a small office barely big enough for a metal desk and filing cabinet. The walls were covered with old photographs, the diner in its earlier days, staff members long gone, and landscapes of Millfield from what looked like the 1930s and 40s. Mabel settled behind the desk, gesturing for me to take the folding chair across from her. "You did well last night. Not everyone makes it through their first rain shift." "The customers," I said, cutting straight to what I most wanted to know. "They're all dead, aren't they?" She considered this, tapping one perfectly manicured nail against her desk. "Not exactly. Death isn't as simple as the living think. There's a process, a journey. Most souls move on immediately, but some get delayed, confused, lost. And they come to the diner, I finished. The last stop serves as a way station, she confirmed. A safe place for souls in transit to rest, refuel, and eventually continue their journey. She smiled thinly. Not unlike what we do for living travelers. But why here? Why Millfield? Mabel leaned back in her chair. Places like this exist all over. Thin spots where the boundaries don't quite hold. Millfield happens to sit at a crossroads of ley lines if you believe in such things. The diner was built here specifically to serve as a sanctuary for passing souls. I thought about the customers from the previous night, the woman from 1952, the hiking family, the businessman with no reflection. And the rules protect us, the living staff. Some do, Mabel nodded. Never following customers to the parking lot, for instance. The diner's protection ends at the threshold. Step outside with them and you might find yourself pulled along wherever they're going. And the others? The salt shakers, the hot chocolate with 7 marshmallows. Comfort and containment, she said simply. Salt binds spirits to their purpose, prevents them from wandering into memories they shouldn't access. The marshmallows are for the children. 7 is a number of completion. Helps them understand their journey isn't finished yet. I absorbed this, thinking about the little boy who described his family's fatal fall with such detachment. And the blue moon? Someone called the diner last night, said their ride arrives with the blue moon. Mabel's expression tightened. That's the real reason I wanted to talk to you. Blue moon nights are complicated. The boundaries thin even further. Many souls who've been waiting will finally move on, but other things can slip through while the doors are open. She fixed me with a serious stare. We'll need additional rules that night. Special precautions. The office suddenly felt too small, too close. What kind of things slip through? Things that were never human, she replied quietly. Things that hunt lost souls, and sometimes living ones too. The diner's protections are strongest against them, which is why we need all hands on deck that night. Is that why you hired me? Because the blue moon is coming? Partly, she admitted. But also because you have a particular quality we need, a sensitivity. You saw it right away, didn't you? What our customers really are. I nodded slowly, remembering how immediately I'd sensed something wrong about the trucker with too many teeth. How easily I'd accepted that the diner served the dead. Not everyone can. Some people would work a month of night shifts and never notice anything stranger than the occasional customer who doesn't leave a tip. She studied me with new intensity. Your grandmother, Eileen Cassidy, from Pomeroy. She had the sight too, didn't she? I stared at her, shocked. How did you know my grandmother's name? Or where she was from? Mabel smiled enigmatically. She stopped here once, back in '73, on her way to visit you when you were born. We remember everyone who passes through the last stop, living or otherwise. Before I could question her further, the office door opened and Betty poked her head in. Evening rush is picking up, Mabel. And Riley's first regular just arrived. Already? Mabel checked her watch with a frown. He's early tonight, not a good sign. She stood, straightening her immaculate uniform. Go on, Riley. We'll talk more later. Remember the rules, especially with this one. Confused but intrigued, I headed out to the main floor. The diner had indeed filled up with the dinner crowd. Families getting a cheap meal, couples on dates, all of them unmistakably alive in a way I could now clearly distinguish. Except for the man sitting alone at the counter. He looked ordinary enough at first glance, middle-aged, medium build, wearing a postal worker's uniform with Frank embroidered on the chest pocket. But as I approached, I noticed the subtle wrongness that marked all our nocturnal customers. His skin had a waxy quality, and his eyes reflected the overhead lights as perfect squares rather than natural pinpricks. "Welcome to Last Stop," I recited. "What can I get you tonight?" Frank smiled, revealing teeth that were too uniform, like a perfect set of dentures. "The usual, Riley. You know what I like." I hesitated, uncertain what the usual might be for a customer I'd never seen before. Eddie appeared at the pass-through window, silently sliding a plate forward, blueberry pancakes with exactly 3 strips of bacon arranged parallel to each other. "Coffee, too," Frank added, watching me with unsettling intensity. "Black, like my soul." He laughed at his own joke, the sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. I poured his coffee and delivered the pancakes, noticing how the other living customers seemed to instinctively avoid the seats near him, leaving an empty buffer zone despite the growing crowd. "So," Frank said conversationally as he cut his pancakes into perfectly identical squares, "you're the new night shift girl. Lasted longer than the last one already." "Oh." I tried to sound casual while checking that his salt shaker was full. "What happened to the last one?" Frank's smile widened just a fraction too far for his face. "She followed a customer to the parking lot. Rule 15, never, under any circumstances, follow a customer out, no matter what they've forgotten or how much they insist." He speared a precise pancake square. Poor thing. Never even made it to her car. A chill ran down my spine. "That's awful." "It's not so bad where she ended up," Frank said with a shrug. "Not good exactly, but not the worst place. Better than where I'm stationed, at least." He gestured to his postal uniform. "Rural Route 436. Endless delivery, never completed. Punishment fits the crime, I suppose." "What crime?" The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Frank leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was a mailman for 37 years. Hid bills, threw away wedding invitations, kept Christmas cards with money in them." He sipped his coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "Small sins add up. When I died, heart attack, 2016. They said I had unfinished deliveries to make. Been working my route ever since." He ate methodically, each bite identical to the last. I busied myself wiping down the counter, unsure how to respond to his confession. "The blue moon's coming," he said suddenly, setting down his fork with precision. "You know what that means?" "Some kind of mass departure, I've been told." Frank nodded, his head moving at an angle that wasn't quite natural. "The bus comes. Not for me. My route's not finished, but for many others." His expression grew serious, the artificial pleasantness dropping away. "And the collector will be hungry." "The collector?" I remembered the shadowy figure in booth 13, the one Eddie had warned me not to look at. Tall fellow, no face to speak of, sits in the corner booth on the last day of each month. Frank's voice had lost its conversational tone, becoming urgent. "He's not like the rest of us, Riley. Not a soul in transit. He's one of the things that hunts in the between places." I glanced nervously toward booth 13, empty now but somehow holding darkness deeper than the surrounding spaces. "What does it collect?" "Souls that don't belong to it," Frank replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Strays, runaways, those who've lingered too long." He took another sip of coffee. "And sometimes, the living who've seen too much." Before I could ask more, the bell above the door jingled. A massive truck driver entered, alive, judging by the way he tracked mud on the floor and the genuine fatigue in his face. I excused myself to serve him, grateful for the interruption. When I returned to Frank's spot at the counter, he had vanished, leaving behind half-eaten pancakes and a full coffee cup. I reached for the plate to clear it, but Eddie's voice stopped me. "Leave it," he called from the kitchen. "He'll be back. Always disappears mid-meal, that one." Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Frank reappeared on the same stool, continuing his meal as if he'd never left. The living truck driver didn't seem to notice the postal worker's impossible return, though he was sitting just 2 seats away. Happens all the time, Frank explained, noticing my confusion. Part of my punishment, never finishing anything, not even a meal. I get pulled back to my route at random intervals. He glanced at the trucker. Don't worry, they can't see me now. The living only notice us when we want them to or when they have a foot in the grave themselves. I recalled the rule about blurry customers and tried not to stare as Frank's outline occasionally shimmered, like a television with poor reception. Been coming to the last stop since my first day on the other side, he continued. It's the only place that feels real anymore. That's why we all come here, you know. To remember what it was like. To be alive, I asked quietly. Frank nodded, polishing off his last piece of bacon. To taste, to feel, to have conversations that aren't about regrets and missed chances. He pushed his empty plate away. The coffee's never hot enough and the food never quite satisfies, but it's the closest thing to living we get. The door jingled again. This time, a young woman entered, soaking wet despite the clear night outside, water pooling beneath her shoes with each step. Her sundress was plastered to her body, and her long hair hung in dripping ropes around a face blue-tinged from lack of oxygen. "Excuse me," I murmured to Frank, immediately moving to seat the rain-soaked woman. "Welcome to Last Stop," I greeted her. "What can I get you tonight?" "Just coffee," she replied, her voice gurgling slightly. "I need to warm up." I seated her at a booth near the window, acutely aware of the puddle forming beneath her. As I poured her coffee, I noticed her fingertips were wrinkled and pale, as if she'd been submerged for hours. "Lily Pearson," Frank said quietly when I returned to the counter. "Drowned in Lake Hope last summer. Boating accident." He shook his head. "She only comes in when it rains, but sometimes she brings the rain with her." Sure enough, droplets had begun to patter against the diner's windows, though the sky had been clear just moments before. "You seem to know a lot about the other customers," I observed, refilling his coffee. Frank shrugged. "Not much else to do on my eternal route but collect gossip. The Postal Service knows everyone's business, even on the other side." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "That's why I'm warning you about the blue moon. This one's different. The manager knows it too." "The manager?" "The big boss, the one who decides who stays and who goes." Frank gestured vaguely upward. "Above Mabel's pay grade, if you catch my meaning." Before I could press for details, the bathroom door opened, and a customer I hadn't seen enter emerged, an elderly woman in a faded house dress, moving with the careful steps of someone with arthritic joints. As she passed Frank, he nodded respectfully. "Evening, Mrs. Whitaker." She paused, smiling at him with perfectly normal teeth that somehow seemed more disturbing than Frank's uniform dentures. "Hello, Francis. Still working that route?" "You know how it is," he replied with a grimace. "No rest for the wicked." Mrs. Whitaker patted his hand, her fingers passing partly through his in a way I pretended not to notice. "It won't be forever, dear. No punishment is." She glanced at me, her eyes sharp and clear. "You're new, taking over for that girl who couldn't follow rules." I nodded, unsure how to respond. "Good. We need reliable staff for what's coming." She straightened her collar with dignity. "The thinning approaches. The door's unlocked. We all must be ready." With that cryptic statement, she walked toward the exit, her form growing increasingly transparent until she simply wasn't there anymore, the bell never jingling to mark her departure. "Died in her sleep in 1984, Frank explained. "One of the lucky ones. Passes through both sides easily." Some of us get stuck more firmly on this side of the veil. He nodded toward Lily, still dripping at her booth. Especially the traumatic deaths. They need more time at the last stop before they're ready to move on. And the blue moon helps them move on? I asked, thinking about the phone call from the previous night. For most, yes. The boundary's thin enough for even the most tethered souls to slip through. Frank's expression darkened. But the doors swing both ways. What passes through can also pass back. That's why the collector will be here in full form, not just the monthly visit. The lights in the diner flickered briefly, and Frank glanced up with sudden alertness. I need to go. My route calls. He slid from his stool, straightening his postal uniform. Be careful, Riley. Not all the rules are written down, and some are written in invisible ink. He walked toward the door, then paused to look back at me. Check the underside of the tables. Margaret left warnings for those with eyes to see. With that, he was gone. Not fading like Mrs. Whitaker had, but simply there one moment and gone the next, the bell above the door tinkling despite no visible contact. I immediately wanted to check beneath the tables as he'd suggested, but the diner had grown busy with living customers finishing late dinners. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when the last normal patrons had left and we were between the living and dead shifts, that I had a chance to investigate. Kneeling beside the nearest booth, I ran my fingers along the underside of the Formica tabletop. At first, I felt nothing unusual, just the smooth surface and metal brackets. Then my fingers caught on something. Small indentations carved into the material. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to examine the marks. Someone had etched symbols into the underside of every table. Protection sigils that I recognized from my grandmother's old books. Eileen Cassidy hadn't just had the sight, as Mabel had put it. She'd been a practicing hedge witch whose remedies and charms were sought after throughout southern Ohio. But these weren't my grandmother's simple protection symbols. These were more complex, more desperate, wards against specific entities, binding sigils meant to trap rather than repel, and what looked like emergency banishing formulas. Under one booth, carved in a different hand than the others, was a message. When the collector claims his due, salt circles protect, iron binds, silver banishes, the doors lock from our side, not theirs. Finding Margaret's notes. Eddie's voice made me jump. He stood behind the counter, wiping glasses with methodical precision. Who was she? I asked, settling onto a stool. Frank mentioned her too. Margaret Holloway, waitressed here from 1947 until her death in 1991. Eddie set down the glass he was polishing. She learned more about the last stop's true nature than anyone, maybe even more than Mabel knows. Started documenting everything, leaving warnings. For who? For whoever would need them when the big one came. Eddie's weathered face was grave. She predicted it decades ago. A blue moon that would thin the veil enough for a full crossing. Not just souls passing through, but a complete collapse of the boundary. The phone call last night, it said their ride arrives with the blue moon. Eddie nodded. Every few years, a bus comes, metaphorically speaking, collects the souls who've been waiting, takes them to their final destination. But this time it's different. This isn't just a regular pickup, it's a mass exodus. Am the collector, I pressed. What exactly is it collecting? Eddie glanced toward booth 13, his expression darkening. Payment. Every crossing has a price. The collector ensures the balance is maintained. He met my eyes directly. For souls to leave, something must be given in return. Usually it's just energy, maybe a few years off the end of our lives. Nothing we'd notice. But for something this big. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implication was clear. The collector would need more substantial payment for the coming Blue Moon event. Is that why Mabel hired me now? To be payment. Eddie shook his head firmly. Mabel protects her staff, always has. That's why the rules exist. They're not just for smooth business operations. They're boundaries, protections. He leaned closer. But the blue moon threatens even those safeguards. That's why you need to learn Margaret's warnings, and quickly. The bell above the door chimed, and we both turned to see our first nocturnal customer of the night. A middle-aged woman in nurse's scrubs covered in what appeared to be blood that never dried. Her neck bent at an unnatural angle, suggesting a car crash. "Welcome to Last Stop," I said automatically. "What can I get you tonight?" As I took her order for pancakes and coffee that she would push around but never actually consume, I couldn't help but wonder what other rules, written and unwritten, I would need to learn before the blue moon rose over Millfield. And whether those rules would be enough to protect any of us when the doors between worlds swung wide open. A week into my employment at the Last Stop, Miller's Auto Repair called with the news that my car needed more work than initially estimated. The transmission wasn't just failing, it was completely shot, requiring either a full rebuild or replacement. Either option would cost more than the Honda was worth. "Looks like I'm stuck here a while longer," I told Mabel that evening, tucking the disheartening estimate into my apron pocket. She smiled that thin, knowing smile. "Millfield has a way of keeping people who need to be here, Riley. Perhaps it's not entirely the car's fault." "You think I'm meant to be here?" I asked skeptically. "For the blue moon?" "I think coincidences are rarely that," she replied. "Your car breaking down within walking distance of the only diner in 3 counties that serves the dead? Your grandmother having been here before? Your natural ability to see our special customers for what they are?" She shook her head. "The universe arranges its players carefully, Riley Cassidy." Before I could press her further, she reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small leather-bound book, its edges worn from years of handling. "This was Margaret's. I think it's time you read it." I took the journal, feeling its weight, both physical and metaphorical. Eddie mentioned her, said she knew more about the diner than anyone. "Margaret Holloway worked the night shift for 44 years, Mabel said. "She started documenting everything after the blue moon of 1953, the last time we had a crossing this significant. Her observations may help you prepare for what's coming." I tucked the journal into my bag, promising to return it once I'd read it thoroughly. That night, after my shift ended at 6 a.m., I sat cross-legged on my motel bed and opened Margaret's worn journal to the first entry, August 17th, 1953. Last night's blue moon brought more than just extra customers to the Last Stop. Something came through with them. Something that didn't go back when the doors closed. Mabel says not to worry, that the diner's protections will hold, but I've seen how it watches us from the shadows. The customers call it the Collector, but I think it's something older than any name we could give it. It took Hank, night cook, 1949 to 1953, when he followed Mrs. Preston to her car, thinking she'd forgotten her purse. The rules matter. They're written in blood and necessity. I continued reading, page after page of Margaret's increasingly detailed observations about the diner's unusual clientele. She documented specific customers, tracking their appearances over decades, noting patterns and anomalies. She created profiles of regulars, like Frank the postal worker and the woman in the trench coat from my first night. More disturbing were her notes about the Collector, which apparently had established a permanent presence at the Last Stop after the 1953 blue moon, January 31st, 1957. The Collector claimed Booth 13 as its monthly feeding ground today. Mabel has established a new rule: coffee and cherry pie, precisely at 3:33 a.m. on the last day of each month. A sacrifice that satisfies without endangering staff or customers. The pie is never eaten, but something happens to the coffee. It doesn't disappear. but rather loses all substance, becoming merely coffee-colored water. What it extracts, I cannot say, but the booth feels heavy with absence afterward. I flipped through more entries, Margaret's handwriting evolving over the decades, but her meticulous documentation remaining consistent. She had drawn diagrams of the diner's layout, marking power spots and vulnerabilities. She'd cataloged the subtle signs that distinguish different types of non-living customers. Those simply in transit versus those stuck in loops versus those with more sinister purposes. Most valuable were the additional rules she'd discovered through trial and error. Unwritten protocols that supplemented the official list. Never compliment a customer's appearance. They may take it as an invitation to share their true form. If silverware disappears from a table, do not attempt to replace it until the customer has left. Should you hear a customer use your full name when you haven't provided it, immediately touch iron and recite your birth date. If the same customer appears in 2 different locations simultaneously, serve only the one that casts a shadow. The coffee must never be allowed to percolate for exactly 7 minutes. 6 minutes, 59 seconds is acceptable. 7 minutes, 1 second is acceptable. Never exactly 7. If you find yourself unable to move while taking an order, how many song released in the current year? This disrupts time-binding attempts. Toward the end of the journal, Margaret's entries became increasingly focused on the blue moon phenomenon, documenting the smaller crossings that had occurred every few years, and the preparations for them. July 24th, 1972. Another blue moon crossing tonight. Smaller than 53, but still significant. The boundaries thin predictably during these events, but the degree varies. Mabel reinforced the protection sigils under the counters and tables. Eddie, new night cook as of 67, created iron filings and salt mixtures to line the thresholds. The collector was more active, watching the proceedings from booth 13, though it wasn't the last day of the month. It seems these crossings both feed and frustrate it, so many souls passing beyond its reach. The final entries were from 1991, just before Margaret's death. Her handwriting had grown shaky, but her mind remained sharp. February 19th, 1991. Mabel confirmed what I've suspected. The blue moon of August 2023 will be a full boundary collapse, not just a thinning. The celestial alignments, the ley line fluctuations, and the sheer number of souls that have accumulated since the last major crossing in 53 have created a perfect storm. The doors won't just open, they'll be removed from their hinges entirely for a brief window. The collector is aware. I see it watching me during my shifts, more substantial than it's been in decades. It knows I'm dying. The doctors gave me 6 months, but I can feel it'll be sooner. It knows I won't be here for the big event, but it wants the knowledge I've accumulated. For whoever reads this in my absence, the rules will change during the collapse. Salt will still protect, but must be mixed with graveyard dirt for full efficacy. Iron repels, silver binds, but only the living can close the doors once opened. The payment required will be substantial. The collector will seek a soul freely given, not just energy or time. The symbols I've carved beneath every surface of the diner are deadbolts, not just locks. Activate them with 3 drops of freely given blood in the center of the diner at precisely midnight under the blue moon. This won't prevent the crossing, but it will ensure the doors can be closed again afterward. There must always be a last stop, but it needn't become a terminal. The journal ended there. I closed it slowly, processing the wealth of information and the chilling predictions. According to Margaret's final entry, the blue moon she'd been so concerned about was just 10 days away. August 31st, 2023. I couldn't sleep after reading the journal, my mind racing with questions and implications. At 10:30 a.m., much earlier than I would normally wake after a night shift. I walked back to the diner to find Mabel. The morning rush was in full swing, the diner packed with living customers enjoying late breakfasts. Betty and another waitress I'd only seen in passing worked the floor with practiced efficiency, while the day cook called orders through the pass-through window. Mabel was at the register, but she didn't seem surprised to see me. "You've read it then," she said, nodding toward her office. Once we were seated in the cramped space, I placed Margaret's journal on the desk between us. "Is it true? About the boundary collapse?" Mabel didn't bother denying it. "Yes. Margaret's predictions have always proven accurate. The crossing on the 31st will be unlike any we've seen in 70 years. And the payment the collector will demand? A soul freely given?" She met my gaze steadily. "The rules of passage are absolute. For so many to cross over, balance must be maintained. Energy exchange is required. Meaning someone has to stay behind, or worse, for the others to move on," I clarified. Mabel neither confirmed nor denied this, which was answer enough. "Margaret mentioned blood and symbols to close the doors afterward," I pressed. "Is that why you hired me now? To be the one who gives that blood?" "I hired you because you have the sight and the necessary lineage," Mabel replied carefully. "Your grandmother understood the boundaries between worlds better than most living people. That knowledge is in your blood, whether you recognize it or not." "And the other part?" "The soul freely given that the collector wants." Mabel's expression softened slightly. "I protect my staff, Riley. Always have. If it comes to that, there are contingencies." The vague response did nothing to reassure me. "What exactly happens during this crossing?" Margaret described it as the doors being removed from their hinges. "An apt metaphor," Mabel nodded. "Normally, the boundary between worlds has specific crossing points, doors, if you will, that can be opened briefly to allow passage in either direction. During a minor blue moon event, these doors open wider and stay open longer, but the basic structure remains intact." She leaned forward, her perfectly manicured hands clasped on the desk. "What's coming on the 31st is different. The entire boundary fails temporarily. There are no doors because there is no wall, just a complete merging of spaces that were never meant to touch." "And the collector? What's its role in all this?" "Enforcement," Mabel said grimly. "It ensures the rules of passage are observed, that the balance is maintained, that nothing crosses that shouldn't." But Margaret wrote that it came through during the 1953 blue moon and stayed. Doesn't that break the rules? A shadow passed across Mabel's face. The collector exists to serve a purpose, not to follow rules itself. It's less an entity and more a function, a mechanism of the boundary. I thought about the shadowy figure I'd glimpsed in booth 13, the way it had seemed to be composed of darkness, more substantial than mere absence of light. If the boundary collapses completely, what's to stop anything and everything from crossing over? Not just lost souls looking for passage, but whatever else exists on the other side. That's why we need Margaret's symbols activated, Mabel explained. They won't prevent the crossing, but they'll establish parameters, rules, limits to what can pass through and how long the collapse lasts. I considered this, remembering the protection sigils carved beneath the diner's tables. And my blood activates them because of my grandmother, because of my lineage. Precisely. The Cassidy line has always had a foot in both worlds. Not just the sight, but the ability to affect the boundaries themselves. Mabel's expression became calculating. It's not coincidence that brought you here, Riley. Your car breaking down in Millfield weeks before the blue moon. The universe has patterns and you're part of this one. So, I don't actually have a choice, I said, an edge creeping into my voice. We always have choices, Mabel corrected. But some are more predestined than others. Your grandmother understood that. When she stopped here in '73, she knew exactly what the last stop was, recognized it immediately. She chose to continue on her journey then, but not before leaving something of herself behind. A contingency, you might say. What do you mean? Mabel opened her desk drawer and removed a small cloth pouch, pushing it across to me. Eileen left this, said it was for family who might come after her in a time of need. I opened the pouch carefully. Inside was a smooth black stone with a natural hole through its center. A hagstone, my grandmother had called them. Protection against malevolent spirits, a window between worlds for those with the sight. Alongside it was a small vial of what appeared to be dried herbs in a folded slip of paper with my name written on it in my grandmother's distinctive handwriting. She knew I'd be here, I whispered, stunned by the implication. She knew someone of her line would be, Mabel clarified. Seers often recognize patterns without understanding their specific manifestations. I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. The message was brief, but sent chills down my spine. To my blood, who finds this? The collector of tolls seeks what was freely promised by one who had no right to offer. The debt is not yours to pay. When the veil falls on the second night of fullness, hold the stone to your eye and see the truth of the bargain. Eileen Cassidy, 1973. What bargain? I asked, looking up at Mabel. What was freely promised? For the first time since I'd met her, Mabel seemed genuinely uncertain. I don't know. Margaret might have, but she took many secrets to her grave. She glanced at her watch and stood. The morning rush needs attention. Take the journal and your grandmother's things. Study them. The blue moon approaches, and we all need to be prepared. As I left her office, I passed booth 13, empty now in the daylight, yet somehow still holding a deeper shadow than the surrounding space. For just a moment, I thought I saw movement in that shadow, a suggestion of awareness focusing on me as I walked by. The last stop served the dead, but it was becoming increasingly clear that not all of its customers were simply souls in transit. Some were something else entirely, entities that existed in the spaces between life and death, with rules and appetites all their own. And in 10 days, when the blue moon rose and the boundary between worlds collapsed, those entities would have free access to our world, with only the diner's dubious protections standing in their way. That, and whatever contingency my grandmother had left behind for me to find. As the blue moon approached, the atmosphere at the last stop grew increasingly tense. Our regular dead customers appeared more frequently, often staying longer and expressing a nervous anticipation I hadn't noticed before. The living customers sensed something too, though they couldn't articulate it. They'd glance over their shoulders more often, lower their voices when certain topics came up, leave larger tips as if paying for protection they didn't consciously know they needed. 3 days before the blue moon, I arrived for my shift to find the diner busier than I'd ever seen it. Every booth was full, the counter packed with customers both living and dead, though the living remained oblivious to those who no longer belonged to their world. Eddie was working the grill with grim intensity, his usual economy of movement now verging on the mechanical. "They're arriving early," he said when I entered the kitchen to stow my bag. "First wave of the crossing." "I thought that didn't happen until the blue moon itself," I said, tying my apron with hands that weren't quite steady. "The main event is on the 31st, he confirmed, "but the boundaries are already thinning. Those who've been waiting the longest can feel it. They're gathering, preparing for their chance to finally move on." I peered through the pass-through window at the crowded diner. Now that I knew what to look for, I could easily distinguish between the living and dead customers. The living were solid, their movements fluid and unpredictable, their voices carrying normally through the space. The dead had a subtle transparency around their edges, their gestures more deliberate, their voices either too soft or eerily resonant. Among the usual dead regulars, Frank the postal worker, Margaret in her trench coat, the hiking family, I spotted at least a dozen new faces. A woman in the 1920s flapper dress, cigarette holder poised eternally between her fingers. A Civil War soldier missing half his face. A young man in the 1990s grunge attire with a guitar case propped beside him, water perpetually dripping from his clothes, suggesting a drowning. "Where do they all come from?" I asked, watching as a new customer entered. An elderly man in hospital pajamas, IV port still taped to his arm, though no tubes connected to it. "Everywhere," Eddie replied. "The last stop exists in more places than just here. There are doorways all over, liminal spaces where the living and dead brush shoulders without realizing it. Hospital corridors at 3 a.m., empty subway platforms, highway rest stops no one seems to remember visiting." I thought about all the nondescript diners I'd visited on road trips, the ones that blended together in memory, impossible to place precisely in time or location afterward. How many had been way stations for the dead, I wondered, with living customers just passing through without noticing. "Welcome to Last Stop," I greeted the man in hospital pajamas as he settled at the counter. "What can I get you tonight?" "Just coffee," he replied, his voice paper thin. "Black. And maybe some answers." I poured his coffee, noting how his hand trembled as he reached for the mug. Unlike many of our dead customers, he seemed newly deceased, still adjusting to his changed state. "I don't understand what's happening," he confided, voice low. "I was in the hospital. Cancer. Stage 4. Then suddenly I was walking along the highway, and this place was the only light for miles." He looked around at the other customers, eyes widening slightly as he began to perceive their true nature. "Are we all in transit?" I supplied gently, using the euphemism Eddie had taught me. "The last stop is a way station of sorts." The man nodded slowly, acceptance settling over him. I thought I'd be afraid, but I'm mostly just tired, ready for whatever comes next. He sipped his coffee, seeming surprised that he could taste it. "My wife passed last year. Do you think she'll be waiting wherever I'm going?" Before I could formulate a response, Frank appeared on the stool beside him, materializing between one blink and the next. "Depends on where you're headed, friend," Frank said, his postal uniform crisper than usual, as if he'd made a special effort with his appearance. "But the blue moon makes all sorts of reunions possible." The newcomer startled, then relaxed as he recognized a fellow traveler. "You've been here longer?" "Since 2016, Frank confirmed. "Stuck in a loop, delivering mail that never reaches its destination. But this crossing might be my ticket out too, if I'm lucky." He nodded toward the new arrival's hospital bracelet. "Robert Chin, from Columbus?" The man blinked in surprise. "How did you—" "Told you? I'm a mailman. I know everyone's address, even on this side." Frank's usual cynical edge had softened, his manner almost gentle with the newcomer. "The blue moon is a big deal, Robert. The biggest crossing in 70 years. If you're looking for your wife, your chances are good. Better than they'll ever be again." Robert's expression brightened with hope. "Really? But how will I find her? I don't even know where I am, let alone where she might be." "The last stop connects to every road, every path," Frank explained, echoing what Eddie had told me about doorways. "When the blue moon rises, those connections expand. The bus comes, metaphorically speaking, and takes everyone where they need to go." "And those who've been waiting longer?" Robert asked. "Like you?" Frank's smile tightened. "Some of us have complications, unfinished business, debts to settle. He glanced at me meaningfully. But even we might find our way onward if the price is right. The bell above the door chimed, and the diner fell unnaturally silent as every dead customer turned to look at the newcomer. I followed their gaze and felt my breath catch. It wasn't a customer at all. The figure that entered was tall and thin, dressed in an impeccable black suit that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. Its face was featureless save for a suggestion of eyes. Not empty sockets like the entity from booth 13, but rather an absence where features should be, as if someone had taken an eraser to the details of a drawing. The collector had arrived early. It moved with unnerving grace, gliding rather than walking to booth 13, which had emptied the moment the bell chimed despite having been occupied seconds before. The living customers continued their meals and conversations, completely oblivious to its presence, though several shivered as it passed them. "It's never come during regular business hours," Frank whispered, his usual confident demeanor cracking. "Never outside the last day of the month. This is bad, Riley. Very bad." Robert Chen stared at the entity with naked fear. "What is that thing?" "The fare collector," Frank replied grimly. "The one who ensures the balance is maintained." He turned to me, eyes serious. "It's here to prepare, to assess what payment will be required for the crossing." I remembered Margaret's journal entry. "The payment required will be substantial. The collector will seek a soul freely given, not just energy or time." "I need to get something from the kitchen," I murmured, setting down my coffee pot with hands that were surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. In the relative safety behind the swinging doors, I found Eddie staring through the small window at the dining room, his expression grave. "It's starting," he said without turning. "The collector never comes this early unless something big is happening." "Frank said it's here to assess payment," I reported. "What exactly does that mean?" Eddie finally looked at me, his weathered face more lined than usual. "The crossing works on equivalent exchange. For souls to move on, energy must be transferred. Usually it's minor. The collective life force of the living staff and customers provides enough for a few souls to pass through during normal operations. But for a mass exodus like the Blue Moon, the requirements escalate proportionally," he confirmed. "The collector is calculating what will be needed, taking inventory of available resources." A chill ran through me. Resources meaning us, the living staff and customers? Among other things. The diner itself has power. 70 years of serving as a way station has imbued it with a certain potency. The land beneath us, the ley line convergence Mabel mentioned, all of it factors into the equation. I thought about my grandmother's cryptic note. "The collector of tolls seeks what was freely promised by one who had no right to offer. The debt is not yours to pay." "Eddie, what was promised to the collector? What deal was made?" He hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. "In 1953, during the last major crossing, something went wrong. The boundary didn't just thin, it tore. Things came through that should have remained on the other side. Dark things. Hungry things." Eddie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "The collector was one of them, but not the worst. Not by a long shot." "What happened?" I prompted when he fell silent. "Chaos. Death. The diner became a battlefield instead of a way station." He gestured vaguely toward the main dining room. "The owner before Mabel, a man named Howard Richardson, made a bargain to restore the boundary and protect the town." "What kind of bargain?" Eddie's expression darkened. "The kind that costs more than the person making it understands. He offered the collector a permanent place here, booth 13, and regular tribute in exchange for its help sealing the breach. But he also promised something else, something for the next major crossing. A soul freely given, I guessed, remembering Margaret's warning." Eddie nodded grimly. Howard promised that when the next major boundary collapse came, this blue moon, the collector could claim a Cassidy as payment. The words hit me like a physical blow. Cassidy? As in, my family? Your grandmother was here that night, 1953. She helped Howard seal the breach. Her power, her knowledge of the boundaries between worlds, was essential to closing the tear. Eddie wouldn't meet my eyes now. Howard promised the collector that when the boundaries collapsed again, a Cassidy would return and offer themselves willingly to maintain the balance. That's insane, I protested. He had no right to promise my family as some kind of sacrifice. That's exactly what your grandmother said when she found out. She was furious, refused to be part of any such bargain. But the deal was already made, witnessed and sealed by forces beyond our understanding. I thought of my grandmother's note again, understanding it more fully now. The debt is not yours to pay. She'd known that eventually a Cassidy would be drawn back to the last stop when the blue moon rose again. She'd left warnings and tools to help whoever that turned out to be, me, escape the bargain made without her consent. Mabel knows about this, I said, the realization dawning. That's why she was so interested in my lineage, why she wasn't surprised when my car broke down here. Eddie shrugged uncomfortably. Mabel inherited Howard's obligations when she took over the diner in '62. She's been preparing for this crossing for decades, trying to find alternatives, strengthening the diner's protections. But she still hired me, knowing what the collector expects. She also gave you Margaret's journal and your grandmother's items, Eddie pointed out. Mabel plays a complicated game, Riley. She serves many masters. The diner, the dead, the living town around us, and whatever powers govern the boundaries themselves. A commotion from the dining area interrupted our conversation. We both turned to look through the pass-through window. The collector had risen from booth 13 and now stood in the center of the diner, that featureless face turning slowly, as if taking inventory of every soul present. The dead customers had pressed themselves against the walls and windows, creating a wide berth around the entity. Even Frank, usually so collected, looked genuinely afraid. The living customers continued eating and chatting, completely oblivious to the supernatural standoff occurring in their midst. The collector raised one long-fingered hand, pointing directly at the kitchen. At me. A voice filled the diner, though the entity had no visible mouth to speak with. It resonated from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, a sound like dry autumn leaves being crushed underfoot. Cassidy, it said, the single word carrying centuries of patient anticipation. The debt comes due. The promise will be honored. Before I could respond, the lights throughout the diner flickered violently. For a brief moment, reality itself seemed to stutter and glitch, like frames missing from a film reel. When the lights stabilized, the collector was gone. Booth 13 empty once more. The dead customers gradually relaxed, resuming their seats and conversations in hushed tones. "What just happened?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "It marked you," Eddie said, his expression grim. "Staked its claim. The collector now recognizes you as the promised payment." My hand went instinctively to my grandmother's hagstone in my pocket. "I'm not sacrificing myself for a deal I never made." "No one expects you to," came Mabel's voice from behind us. I turned to find her standing in the doorway to the back office, her perfect composure finally showing cracks. She looked tired, older somehow. "I hired you because I needed a Cassidy here," she admitted, "but not as a sacrifice, as our best hope for finding another way." "What other way?" I demanded. "If the collector doesn't get what was promised." "Then we find something of equal value to offer instead," she interrupted. "That's why I gave you Margaret's journal. That's why I made sure your grandmother's items reached you. Eileen Cassidy found another way in 1953, and her knowledge might help us find one again." "Why didn't you just tell me this from the beginning?" I asked, anger rising through my fear. "Because the collector watches, listens. If it had known our intentions from the start, it would have taken measures to stop us." Mabel straightened her immaculate uniform, regaining some of her usual dignity. "Now that it's marked you, we have to move quickly. The blue moon is 3 days away, and we need to prepare." "Prepare how?" I asked, still trying to process everything I'd learned. "Your grandmother's hagstone is a window between worlds," Mabel explained. "With it, you can see the true nature of the bargain, the actual terms, not just Howard's understanding of them. Contracts with entities like the collector always have loopholes if you know where to look." "And the vial of herbs she left?" "Protection," Eddie supplied. "Eileen was known for her protective mixtures. That one should shield you from direct influence by the collector, stop it from compelling you to fulfill the bargain against your will." A thought struck me. Is that why my car broke down here? Was I being compelled somehow? Mabel shook her head. "Not by the collector. The universe has its own way of putting people where they need to be. Your car broke down here because, on some level, you needed to be here. Cassidy blood called to Cassidy purpose." I didn't find that particularly reassuring. "So what do we do now?" "We continue as normal," Mabel said firmly. "Follow the rules, serve the customers, but prepare in every spare moment. Study Margaret's journal for any clues about alternatives to the promised payment. Practice using the hagstone. It takes skill to see clearly between worlds. And when the blue moon rises," I pressed. "When the blue moon rises," Eddie said gravely, "we either find another way, or we face the consequences of breaking a 70-year-old promise to something that doesn't forgive and never forgets." The swinging door to the dining room pushed open, and Betty poked her head in. "Riley, Table 4 needs coffee, and there's a new customer at the counter asking for you specifically." I took a deep breath, centering myself. "I'll be right there." When Betty withdrew, I turned back to Mabel and Eddie. I'm not going to be anyone's sacrifice. My grandmother didn't accept this bargain, and neither do I. "That's the spirit we need," Mabel said with unexpected warmth. "Rebellion is in the Cassidy blood. Eileen would be proud." I straightened my apron and headed back into the dining room, coffee pot in hand. As I emerged from the kitchen, I immediately spotted the new customer Betty had mentioned. A woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing a simple floral dress that didn't quite match any current fashion. What caught my attention, however, was the striking resemblance she bore to old photos I'd seen of my grandmother. Not identical, but close enough to suggest family connection. And unlike our dead regulars, she appeared completely solid, with no telltale signs of being deceased. "Welcome to Last Stop," I said as I approached her, following protocol despite my racing thoughts. "What can I get you tonight?" The woman looked up, her eyes, my grandmother's eyes, my eyes, crinkling with a gentle smile. "Coffee to start, black as midnight." Her voice carried the same soft Appalachian lilt I remembered from childhood visits to my grandmother's home. As I poured her coffee, she leaned forward slightly. "You look just like her, you know. Eileen at your age was the spitting image." My hand trembled slightly, coffee nearly spilling. "You knew my grandmother?" "Oh yes," she replied, watching me with keen interest. "I'm Iris Cassidy, your great-aunt. Eileen was my sister." I nearly dropped the coffee pot. My grandmother had mentioned a sister once or twice, but always in past tense, as someone long gone. Yet here she sat, appearing as alive and solid as any regular customer. "That's impossible," I whispered. "You'd be over 90 by now." Iris's smile widened. Time works differently when you know the old ways, child. And the Cassidy women have always known the old ways. She sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving mine. I've been watching for signs of the blue moon's return for decades. When I felt the boundaries starting to thin, I knew it was time to find Eileen's granddaughter. How did you know it would be me? Blood calls to blood when the veils grow thin, she said simply, and I've been waiting a very long time to help right a wrong that never should have happened. She reached across the counter and took my hand in hers, warm, solid, undeniably alive. The collector believes it owns a Cassidy soul because of Howard Richardson's foolish promise. But what Howard didn't understand, what the collector doesn't know, is that no one can promise another person's soul, not truly, not bindingly. Then why is it so fixated on me? I asked, keeping my voice low as I glanced toward booth 13. Because it believes in the power of bloodlines and inheritance of obligation. Old entities like the collector operate on ancient rules, symbolic logic, not modern contract law. Iris squeezed my hand before releasing it. But we're going to teach it about fine print and loopholes, just like Eileen started to do in '53. For the first time since reading Margaret's journal, since learning about the bargain that had ensnared me through no choice of my own, I felt a glimmer of hope. How do we begin? I asked. Iris's expression grew serious. First, we need to talk about what really happened in 1953. Because the story Eddie and Mabel know is only half the truth. And the real truth might just save us all when the blue moon rises. After my shift ended at 6 a.m., Iris and I walked to Miller's Auto Repair where my useless Honda still sat, waiting for parts that would never come. The morning was misty, the sun barely breaking through a thick layer of clouds that seemed to hang lower over Millfield with each passing day, as if the thinning boundary between worlds was physically manifesting in the atmosphere. Your car didn't break down by accident, Iris said as we stood looking at the Honda through the chain-link fence. But it wasn't the collector's doing either. Then whose? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. Iris smiled, the expression making her look remarkably like my grandmother. Mine. I needed you here, and I needed you stuck, at least until after the blue moon. You sabotaged my car. I wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. A simple binding spell on the transmission, easily reversed when the time comes. She shrugged unapologetically. Family takes care of family, even when it requires unconventional methods. We continued walking to a small diner on the other side of town, Apple Annie's, a genuinely normal establishment that served genuinely living customers. Iris claimed we needed neutral ground for our conversation, somewhere the collector had no influence or awareness. Over plates of scrambled eggs and toast, she finally told me the true story of what happened in 1953. Your grandmother was just 20 that summer, younger than you are now, but already recognized as a powerful practitioner of the old mountain ways. When the blue moon rose and the boundary between worlds began to tear, she was visiting a cousin in Millfield. She felt the disruption immediately. Iris stirred sugar into her tea with methodical precision. The last stop had been a way station for decades already, but it wasn't equipped to handle a full boundary collapse. Things came through. Dark, hungry things that had been waiting centuries for such an opportunity. The collector was one of them? I asked. Number the collector was already here, in a sense, not physically manifest, but present as a function of the boundary itself. When the tear occurred, it took solid form for the first time, attracted by the sudden disruption in its domain. I tried to wrap my mind around this. So it's not evil? Just doing its job? Good and evil are human concepts, Iris replied. The collector simply is. It maintains balance, ensures that what passes from one side to the other is properly accounted for, that appropriate exchange occurs. Like a cosmic customs agent, I suggested. That earned a small smile. Not entirely inaccurate, but when the boundary tore in 53, all normal processes broke down. Think of it as a massive system failure. Regulations collapsed, contraband flooded through, and the agents meant to stop it were overwhelmed. She continued her story. Eileen, my grandmother, had come to the last stop seeking shelter from the chaos erupting throughout Millfield as entities from beyond the boundary manifested in our world. Howard Richardson, the diner's owner, was desperately trying to protect his customers and staff, establishing makeshift wards and barriers that were rapidly failing against the onslaught. Your grandmother recognized immediately what was happening, Iris said. She'd been raised on stories of the thin places, taught from childhood how to recognize and navigate the boundaries between worlds. She knew that to seal the tier, tremendous power would be required, more than any single practitioner could generate. So she helped Howard make a deal with the Collector, I finished. Iris shook her head. That's where the story gets twisted. Howard attempted to make a deal on his own, offering the Collector a permanent place in our world, a foothold at the last stop, in exchange for its help closing the breach. But such a bargain required more power than Howard possessed. What happened? The Collector refused his terms as insufficient. It demanded more, specifically, the sacrifice of a powerful practitioner to seal the breach. Howard, desperate and foolish, offered Eileen without her knowledge or consent. I felt a cold anger building at the thought of my grandmother being offered up like a bargaining chip. But she obviously didn't accept this bargain. No, she did not, Iris confirmed with fierce pride. When she discovered what Howard had done, she confronted the Collector directly. She offered an alternative. Instead of a single sacrifice, she proposed a temporary binding that would close the breach while leaving the Collector anchored to booth 13 until the next major crossing. This crossing, I said. The blue moon that's coming. Iris nodded. The Collector accepted her counteroffer, with specific terms. At the next major crossing, a Cassidy would return to either complete the original bargain, a soul freely given, or provide an alternative of equal value. But what could equal a human soul? I wondered aloud. That's what we need to determine, Iris replied. And quickly. Because the Collector believes you are here to fulfill the original bargain, to sacrifice yourself as payment for permanently sealing the boundary. I pushed my barely touched breakfast aside, appetite gone. And what happens if I don't? If we can't find an alternative? Then the boundary remains open after the crossing, the tear that began in 1953 and was temporarily patched by your grandmother's binding spell ruptures completely. And what waits on the other side, entities far worse than our regulars at the last stop, gains permanent access to our world. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just about Millfield or the diner, or even my own fate. It was about maintaining the fundamental separation between worlds that was never meant to touch. So, how do we find this alternative payment? I asked. My grandmother left the hagstone and herbs, but no instructions for what actually solves this problem. That's where I come in, Iris said, reaching into her handbag and withdrawing a small leather-bound book, similar to Margaret's journal, but much older, its cover cracked and faded with age. This is Eileen's grimoire, her record of spells, bindings, and workings. She documented everything about the 1953 incident, including the exact terms of her agreement with the Collector. She passed the book to me reverently. The specific clause we need relates to payment of equal value. Your grandmother was clever. She defined equal value in the binding itself, creating a loophole we can exploit. I opened the grimoire carefully, the pages so brittle they threatened to crumble under my fingers. My grandmother's handwriting filled every inch, interspersed with diagrams, pressed herbs, and symbols I recognized from Margaret's notes about the diner's protective sigils. Page 73, Iris directed. The Sealing of the Breach, 1953. I turned to the indicated page and found a detailed account of the Blue Moon incident, including a transcription of the bargain struck with the collector. The language was formal, almost legalistic, yet interwoven with phrases and terms I recognized from my grandmother's folk remedies and protection charms. The boundary shall be sealed by the power of Cassidy blood freely given, bound by salt and iron and intention. This binding shall hold until the second blue moon of the 8th month in the year 2023, when the stars align in the pattern of the opener and the veil thins beyond measure. At such time, a Cassidy shall return to the last stop and offer payment to maintain the seal. Either a soul freely given to the collector's keeping, or alternative payment of equal value as measured by the weight of intention against the scales of balance. Equal value shall be determined as that which balances the scales of passage, not measured in life or soul or years, but in freely offered power sufficient to maintain the boundary's integrity. Such power may be drawn from any willing source, provided it is given with full knowledge and consent. This agreement supersedes and replaces any prior arrangement made by Howard Richardson or any other party regarding Cassidy obligation to the collector. No soul may be promised except by its owner. No debt inherited by blood alone. I looked up at Iris, hope blooming. This says no soul is required, just power sufficient to maintain the boundary, and it can come from any willing source. Exactly, Iris confirmed, smiling. The collector believes it's owed a Cassidy soul because that's what Howard initially promised, but Eileen's actual agreement specifies something different. Power, freely given, of sufficient strength to maintain the boundary. But where do we find that kind of power? I asked. My grandmother was apparently some kind of powerful witch. I'm just me. I don't know any spells or bindings. You have the sight, Iris pointed out. You recognized the dead customers immediately, without training or preparation. That's rare, even in our family. And you have Cassidy blood, the same blood that sealed the breach before. That's not enough, though, is it? Iris's expression grew serious. Number but, combined with the power of the last stop itself, the energy accumulated through 70 years of serving as a way station between worlds. It might be, especially if we can harness the moment of crossing, when energy will be flowing freely between realms. I considered this. The diner as a power source. But wouldn't that destroy it? Not destroy, transform. Iris took back the grimoire, handling it with practiced care. The last stop was built on a convergence of ley lines, specifically to serve as a doorway between worlds. If we redirect its accumulated power into sealing the boundary permanently, it would no longer function as a way station, but it would remain as a normal diner in the normal world. And the dead customers? The ones waiting to cross over? Would pass through during the Blue Moon crossing, as intended. This would be their last chance, their actual last stop. Iris's expression softened with compassion. Many have been waiting decades for this opportunity. It would be a kindness to ensure they can move on. I thought about Frank, about Margaret and her trench coat, about the little boy from the hiking family with his 7 marshmallows. They deserved to complete their journeys, to find whatever waited for them beyond the last stop. What would we need to do? I asked finally. A ritual, performed at the exact moment the blue moon reaches its zenith. It would require your blood, freely given, not taken, combined with the Hagstone's power and the diner's accumulated energy. Iris hesitated. It would be dangerous. The collector won't simply stand aside while we alter the terms of the agreement. It will fight to claim what it believes it's owed. My soul, I said flatly. Yes, which is why we need to prepare. She reached across the table and took my hand. The herbs your grandmother left will help protect you from direct influence, but they won't stop the collector from physical action. We'll need other safeguards. Like what? Margaret's symbols beneath the tables, for one. Those need to be recharged, reinforced. We need salt lines at every threshold, iron at the cardinal points. Iris squeezed my hand before releasing it. And you need to learn how to use the hagstone properly. Not just to see between worlds, but to focus and direct the energy of the crossing. It was overwhelming, but for the first time since learning about the bargain that had entangled me, I felt like we had a plan, a chance to resolve this without sacrificing my life or soul. When do we start? I asked. We already have, Iris replied, nodding toward the grimoire. Take that with you. Study it during your off hours. Focus especially on the binding techniques and protection sigils. I'll spend today gathering what we need for the ritual. And the collector? It's already marked me. Won't it know what we're planning? It knows something is happening, but not what. It believes you're considering your options, perhaps looking for a way to escape your fate. Iris smiled grimly. Let it think that. Its arrogance is one of our few advantages. It won't expect direct confrontation from creatures it considers lesser beings. As we left the diner, the mist had thickened, cutting visibility to less than a block in any direction. The air felt heavy, charged, as if a thunderstorm approached, but couldn't quite break. The boundary continues to thin, Iris observed, looking up at the obscured sky. 2 more days until the blue moon. We need to be ready by then. And if we're not? I couldn't help asking. If something goes wrong? Iris's expression was grave. Then the collector takes what it believes it's owed, the boundary tears completely, and what comes through will make our current dead customers look positively benign by comparison. We parted ways at the intersection, Iris heading to gather supplies, me returning to my motel room to study my grandmother's grimoire before my next shift. As I walked, I felt a prickling awareness on the back of my neck. When I turned to look behind me, a tall, thin figure stood in the mist at the edge of visibility, the collector, watching, waiting. It knew I was planning something. It might not know exactly what, but its patience was clearly running thin. I clutched the grimoire tighter and hurried toward the motel, hoping that 2 days would be enough time to master whatever skills I needed to confront an entity that had been collecting souls since before human civilization began. The true bargain my grandmother had struck gave us a chance, a small one, but real. Now we just had to survive long enough to exploit it when the blue moon rose. They say that in Millfield, Ohio, there's a stretch of Route 16 where the mist never fully lifts, even on the clearest summer days. If you drive through it at just the right hour, not quite midnight, not quite dawn, you might glimpse the neon sign of a diner that isn't there when you make the return trip. The locals don't talk about it much, but they'll warn you if you're paying attention. Don't stop there unless you're absolutely certain of your destination. It's been 6 months since the blue moon rose over the last stop diner. 6 months since I made my choice, paid the price, and changed the rules of a game that had been playing out for 70 years. The diner still stands on that foggy stretch of highway, still serves coffee and pie to weary travelers. But it's changed in ways only a few of us can perceive. The dead no longer congregate at its counter. Booth 13 sits empty, night after night. The jukebox plays normal songs at normal speeds, controlled by quarters rather than unseen hands. Mabel retired the day after the blue moon. She handed me the keys with a tired smile and a simple statement. It's yours now, if you want it. I didn't understand then. I'm not sure I fully do even now. Eddie stayed on as cook, though he's training his nephew to take over so he can finally enjoy his long-delayed retirement. He never talks about what happened that night, but sometimes I catch him watching the empty spaces where our special customers used to sit, a mixture of relief and melancholy in his eyes. As for me, I'm still here, still serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs, still maintaining the diner that my blood transformed from a way station into a sanctuary. My car remains at Miller's, the binding spell lifted, but my desire to leave Millfield somehow diminished, at least for now. The regulars don't come anymore. Not Frank with his postal uniform, not Margaret in her trench coat, not the hiking family with their quiet tragedy. They moved on during the crossing, along with hundreds of others who had been waiting for decades for their chance to complete their journeys. All except one. The bell above the door chimes at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night, right on schedule. She enters with measured steps, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose bun. Her eyes, my grandmother's eyes, my eyes, finding me immediately, no matter where I am in the diner. Coffee, black as midnight. Iris orders, sliding into her usual seat at the counter. I pour her cup, our fingers brushing as I pass it to her. Hers are solid, warm, alive, not like the spectral customers who used to populate the last stop during the night shift. She remains firmly in the land of the living, despite the price we both paid when the blue moon rose. "Any visitors today?" she asks casually, though we both know what she's really asking. I shake my head. The boundary holds. No sign of thinning, no sign of the collector. Her smile is satisfied, a touch smug. As expected, a bargain is a bargain after all, even for entities like that one. The bargain, such a simple word for what we did that night. When the blue moon reached its zenith on August 31st, the boundary between worlds didn't just thin. It dissolved completely for 17 minutes and 33 seconds. The dead and living occupied the same space, the same moment, with full awareness of each other for the first time in generations. The collector came for me as predicted, materializing in the center of the diner in a form far more substantial and terrifying than the shadow entity that had watched from booth 13. It demanded its due, a Cassidy soul freely given, as promised 70 years prior. What it didn't expect was for two Cassidys to stand against it, me with my grandmother's hagstone held to my eye, Iris with the grimoire open to the binding spell. Together we invoked the actual terms of Eileen's agreement. Alternative payment of equal value, measured not in life or soul, but in freely offered power sufficient to maintain the boundary's integrity. The collector raged, the diner shook, the very foundations of reality trembled as the boundary collapsed around us. Our dead customers began crossing over, some with joy, some with fear, all with the finality of travelers who know they can never return. Iris and I stood at the center of the maelstrom, completing the ritual my grandmother had begun 70 years earlier. Our blood, freely given, dripped from voluntarily cut palms, activated Margaret's symbols carved beneath every surface of the diner. The hagstone focused the energy of the crossing, channeling it through the last stop's accumulated decades of power. The price was high, the diner's special nature, its ability to serve as a way station between worlds, burned away in the conflagration of power necessary to permanently seal the boundary. And something of us burned with it, some essential human quality sacrificed to satisfy the collector's demand for equal value. Iris lost her connection to the old powers, the hedge witch abilities that had kept her young far beyond normal human limits, the knowledge accumulated through decades of working with the boundaries between worlds. She remains herself in all the ways that matter, but the magic that defined much of her life is gone. As for me, I gained as much as I lost. The sight, my ability to perceive the dead, expanded beyond recognition. I see not just the departed, but the layers of reality itself, the multiple worlds that exist alongside our own, separated by boundaries both fragile and essential. It's a mixed blessing at best, this constant awareness of what lurks just beyond normal perception. And I'm bound to the last stop now, not as prisoner or sacrifice, but as guardian. The diner may no longer serve as a way station for souls in transit, but it remains a linchpin in the boundary between worlds. My blood maintains the seal, my presence ensures the collector keeps its distance, and the coffee still needs brewing regardless of metaphysical shifts and responsibility. "You're brooding again," Iris observes, breaking into my thoughts. "The past is past, Riley. You made your choice. We both did." I smile ruefully and refill her cup. Hard not to think about it sometimes, especially at this hour. The diner is empty save for us, the 3 a.m. quiet broken only by the soft sounds of Eddie prepping the grill for the early breakfast crowd. No spectral customers linger at the booths. No impossible music plays from the jukebox. Just a normal night shift in what appears, to most eyes, to be a perfectly ordinary roadside diner. "Do you regret staying?" Iris asks suddenly, her gaze sharp despite the late hour. I consider the question honestly. Number. I don't think I do. This place, it needs someone who understands what it is, what it was, and what it might become again, if the boundaries weaken. She adds quietly, "That's the part we don't discuss often. The possibility that what we did wasn't actually permanent, that some future blue moon might once again strain the fabric between worlds to breaking point, that someday another Cassidy might find themselves drawn to Millfield by circumstance that isn't coincidence at all." The bell above the door chimes again, startling us both. It's well past the hour when normal customers usually arrive, and our special clientele no longer exist in this realm. A teenage girl enters, soaking wet despite the clear night outside, water pooling beneath her shoes with each step. Her sundress is plastered to her body, and her long hair hangs in dripping ropes around a face blue-tinged from lack of oxygen. Lily Pearson, the girl who drowned in Lake Hope last summer. She shouldn't be here. None of them should be able to return. The crossing was meant to be permanent, the boundary sealed. Yet, as I watch, stunned, the bell chimes again, and Frank the postal worker steps through. His uniform crisper than I've ever seen it, his face more peaceful. Behind him comes the hiking family, the little boy no longer pale and shadowed, but vibrant and whole. One by one they enter, all our regulars, all those who crossed over during the blue moon. But they're different now, more substantial, more real. The telltale signs that mark them as deceased are gone, replaced by an otherworldly luminescence that suggests transformation rather than simple passage. "What's happening?" I whisper to Iris, who appears as shocked as I am. "They crossed over. They shouldn't be able to come back." Before she can respond, a final figure enters, tall and elegant in a black dress that shimmers like the night sky. Her face both familiar and strange. Older than I remember, yet somehow ageless. Margaret Holloway, the waitress who documented everything, whose journal guided me through my first days at the last stop. "Hello, Riley Cassidy," she says, her voice resonant with power that was never evident during her ghostly visits. "It seems we have unfinished business." I'm frozen in place, coffee pot still in hand, as Margaret approaches the counter. She's not dead, not in the way our customers used to be, but she's not exactly alive either. She's something else entirely. "What are you?" I manage to ask, setting down the pot before I drop it. "What are all of you?" Margaret smiles, the expression genuinely warm. "We are the guardians now, those who chose to serve rather than simply pass through." She gestures to the others, who have taken their usual seats as if resuming a routine momentarily interrupted. "When you transformed the last stop, when you sealed the boundary, you created something new. Not just a wall between worlds, but a watchtower. Iris has moved to stand beside me, her expression a mixture of awe and wariness. The ritual changed more than just the diner, she murmurs. It changed them too. Indeed, Margaret confirms, those of us who had lingered longest, who had formed the strongest connections to this place, we were offered a choice during the crossing. Move on to whatever waited beyond, or return as guardians of the new boundary. Frank adjusts his postal uniform, no longer the eternal punishment of his afterlife, but a chosen emblem of his new purpose. Some of us had unfinished business anyway, he says with a wink. Seems fitting to put it to good use. But the boundary is sealed, I protest, confusion mounting. That was the whole point of the ritual, of the sacrifice we made. Sealed but not impenetrable, Margaret explains. What your grandmother began, what you completed. It created a permanent barrier where once there was a permeable membrane. But barriers can be breached, given enough time and pressure. She leans forward, her voice dropping. And there is tremendous pressure from the other side, Riley. The Blue Moon Crossing denied passage to entities far darker than any you've encountered. They haven't given up. They've merely been forced to seek new approaches. A chill runs through me as I understand what she's telling me. The last stop has transformed from way station to fortress, and these former customers, these souls who chose to return, are its garrison. So what happens now? I ask, looking around at the familiar faces watching me with new awareness, new purpose. Now we keep watch, Margaret says simply. From both sides of the boundary, those who crossed completely maintain vigilance from the beyond. Those of us who returned patrol this side, strengthening weak points as they develop, warning of potential breaches. Lily Pearson speaks up, her voice no longer carrying that subtle gurgle of drowning. We're not confined to the diner anymore. We can go where we're needed, anywhere the boundary shows signs of stress. Like a supernatural border patrol, I say, the reality of this new arrangement slowly sinking in. The little boy from the hiking family grins, looking healthier and happier than I've ever seen him. And you're like our boss now, the captain of the guard. His mother shushes him gently, but Margaret nods in confirmation. Your blood sealed the boundary, Riley. Your presence maintains it, and your sight, enhanced by the ritual, allows you to perceive threats before they fully manifest. I look to Iris, uncertain how to process this unexpected development. She seems equally surprised, but recovers more quickly. The universe does love its symmetry, she says with a small smile. The last stop transforms from way station to guard post, its customers from transients to sentinels. She studies Margaret with renewed interest. And you? What exactly is your role in this new arrangement? Liaison, Margaret replies, between Ryrie and the Guardians, between this world and what lies beyond. She straightens, suddenly all business. Which brings me to why we've returned tonight specifically. There's been a disturbance, a probing of the boundary near the old Miller property. The cemetery, Iris says immediately, the oldest graves in Millfield. Margaret nods. Something is attempting to create a new doorway, exploiting the thin spot where the cemetery borders the lake. It's still in early stages, but we thought you should be aware. My first instinct is alarm, but a strange calmness settles over me as I absorb this information. This is what I signed up for, intentionally or not. This is the responsibility I accepted when I chose to stay. What do we need to do? I ask, already reaching for my coat. And so begins a new chapter at the Last Stop Diner. By day, we serve the living, truckers and travelers and locals who see nothing more than a charming retro eatery with excellent pie. By night, We host a different clientele, guardians who monitor the boundary between worlds, who report weaknesses and incursions, who help maintain the seal my blood created. I still pour coffee. I still follow rules, though they've evolved from the list Mabel gave me on my first day to a more complex protocol developed in partnership with our spectral guardians. Some nights are quiet. Some bring warnings of developing threats that require immediate attention. Margaret returns regularly to provide updates and guidance. Frank patrols the highways surrounding Millfield, keeping watch for unusual travelers. Lily monitors the waterways, attuned to disturbances that ripple through lakes and streams when something attempts to cross over. Iris stays too, having found a new purpose in helping me manage this supernatural border security operation. Without her magic, she can't perceive the Guardians as clearly as I can, but her knowledge of the old ways remains invaluable as we develop new protections, new responses to emerging threats. Eddie takes it all in stride, as he does everything. At least these customers tip better than the old ones, he observes dryly after a particularly busy night of Guardian activity. And me? I'm still learning, still adjusting to my role as both diner owner and boundary keeper. The site continues to develop, allowing me to perceive not just our Guardians, but the subtle energy fluctuations that indicate boundary stress. My grandmother's hagstone has become a tool I use daily. The protective herb's a standard addition to my coffee. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of night, I wonder what my life would have been like if my car hadn't broken down in Millfield, if I'd never taken the job at the last stop, never learned about the dead customers in the Blue Moon, and the bargain that ensnared my family for generations. But then the bell above the door chimes, and another Guardian arrives with news of the boundary, or a living customer wanders in seeking coffee and sanctuary without realizing why this particular diner feels so safe, so set apart from the troubles of the world outside. And I remember what Mabel told me that first week. The last stop serves a purpose in this town. A purpose more important than just coffee and pie. She was right. It's just that the purpose has evolved, transformed by blood freely given and choices freely made. No longer just a way station between life and what comes after, but a fortress protecting one world from another. The rules have changed, but the most important one remains the same. Serve those who enter, whether they're living, dead, or something in between. Keep the coffee hot, the pie fresh, and the boundary intact. Welcome to the Last Stop Diner. What can I get you tonight?